I stood at the end of the dirt road, my navy duffel bag cutting into my shoulder like a blade, staring at the empty space where my childhood home should have been. The farmhouse, my father's farmhouse, the one he promised would always be mine, was gone. Not abandoned, not burned down, not foreclosed. Gone. Erased from existence like it had never been there at all. In its place stood a massive, soulless McMansion with fake stone columns that looked like they belonged on a movie set, perfectly manicured lawns that had never known a day of honest work, and decorative shutters that would never close because they were nailed to the vinyl siding for aesthetic purposes only. My hands started shaking before my mind could fully catch up to what I was seeing. The July heat pressed down on me like a physical weight, the Virginia humidity making my dress uniform stick to my back in ways that felt suffocating. I'd been traveling for 36 hours straight. Military transport from Bahrain to Germany, commercial flight from Germany to Dulles, rental car from Dulles to Charlottesville. I was exhausted, I was disoriented, and I was staring at something that couldn't possibly be real. I'd been deployed for 18 months. 18 long, brutal months of sandstorms and gunfire and sleeping in 120-degree heat, holding on to one single thought that kept me sane through all of it. I was coming home. Home to the 200-acre farm in rural Virginia that had been in my family for 4 generations. Home to the wraparound porch where Dad and I used to shell peas on summer evenings while fireflies danced in the twilight. Home to the barn where I'd learned to ride at age 6, where I'd spent countless hours brushing down horses and mucking stalls and learning the value of hard work. Home to the fields I'd helped harvest since I was 8 years old, standing on my tiptoes to reach the tobacco leaves, my small hands stained green by the end of each day. My father had died of a heart attack 3 months into my deployment, and I couldn't even get emergency leave to come to his funeral. The Navy had denied my request. We were in the middle of a critical operation, my commanding officer had said, and I was essential personnel. So I'd stood on the deck of the USS Winston Churchill, staring out at the endless expanse of the Persian Gulf, and I'd cried for my father while my shipmates pretended not to notice. I'd missed his burial. I'd missed the wake. I'd missed the chance to say goodbye to the man who'd raised me alone after my mother died of breast cancer when I was 12 years old. But I'd held on to his last words to me before I shipped out, held on to them like a lifeline in the darkest moments of deployment. We'd been standing in the barn, and I was loading my sea bag into my truck, and he'd grabbed my shoulders with those rough, calloused hands that had worked this land for 53 years. "Sarah Bear," he'd said, his voice thick with emotion, "this land is yours. No matter what happens to me, no matter what anyone tells you, this land will always be yours. I've made sure of it. You understand me? This isn't just dirt and trees. This is your blood. This is your legacy." I'd believed him. God help me. I'd believed every word. Now I walked up the pristine driveway like a ghost haunting her own life, my boots feeling too heavy on the stamped concrete, my breath coming too shallow in my chest. A silver Lexus SUV sat in the circular driveway, the kind of vehicle that cost more than most people make in a year, with custom wheels and tinted windows, and a personalized license plate that read VNSSA. I didn't recognize it. I didn't recognize anything. The massive oak tree where Dad had built me a tire swing when I was 7 was gone, cut down and replaced with some decorative Japanese maple that looked like it cost a fortune and would never provide shade worth a damn. The vegetable garden my mother had loved, where she'd grown tomatoes and green beans and zucchini, was paved over with decorative stamped concrete painted to look like cobblestones. Even the old chicken coop, where I'd collected eggs every morning before school, was demolished, replaced with a 3-car garage that probably housed vehicles worth more than the entire original farmhouse. The air smelled wrong. That was what hit me most. the absence of familiar scents. No hay, no earth, no horses, no manure, no cut grass, just fresh paint and expensive landscaping mulch and whatever chemical they use to make lawns look artificially green. It was like someone had taken everything I'd ever loved and replaced it with a sterile simulation of rural living designed for people who'd never done a day of real work in their lives. When I rang the doorbell on what used to be my own goddamn house, I heard footsteps clicking on marble floors inside. High heels, expensive ones. The door swung open, and there she was, Vanessa, my stepmother of 3 years, wearing a white silk blouse that probably cost more than my monthly Navy salary, and designer jeans that looked like they'd been painted on. Her platinum blonde hair was pulled back in a tight ponytail that stretched her face into a perpetual expression of surprised irritation. Her nails were done in that French manicure style that requires weekly salon visits. Her makeup was flawless, applied with the precision of someone who had nothing better to do with her time than stare at herself in a mirror for an hour every morning. She looked at me like I was a door-to-door salesperson, like I was a beggar, like I was nothing. "Sarah," she said, my name sounding like a curse in her mouth, like something distasteful she had to spit out. "What are you doing here?" "What am I doing here?" The words came out strangled, barely human, my voice cracking on the last syllable. I pushed past her into what used to be the foyer, except it wasn't the foyer anymore. It was some kind of museum gallery with walls painted in that trendy gray color that rich people love. Abstract art that looked like someone had thrown paint at a canvas while blindfolded, and a chandelier hanging from the 20-foot ceiling that probably cost more than my entire year's salary. The floor was marble, actual Italian marble, I could tell by the veining, and my boots left dirt marks on the pristine white surface. "What the hell happened to my house, Vanessa? Where's the farm? Where's everything?" She closed the door with a soft click that somehow sounded louder than a slam, her movements careful and controlled, like she was dealing with a wild animal that might attack at any moment. "This isn't your house anymore, Sarah, and you need to lower your voice. My husband is on a conference call upstairs." My husband. The words hit me like a physical slap, like she'd reached out and struck me across the face. Dad had been dead for 15 months. 15 months. And she already had a new husband living in a house built on my father's grave, sleeping in a bedroom constructed over the spot where our kitchen used to stand. "Your husband? Are you—" I couldn't even finish the sentence. My vision was blurring at the edges, rage and grief mixing into something toxic in my chest, something that felt like it might consume me from the inside out. "You sold my father's farm, the farm he left to me, the farm that's been in my family since 1847, since my great-great-grandfather bought this land with money he'd saved working on the railroad for 12 years. You sold it and built this monument to yourself on top of it?" Vanessa sighed, a delicate sound of exasperation, like I was being unreasonable, like I was the problem here. She walked into what I assumed was the living room, all white furniture and glass coffee tables, and not a single photograph of my father anywhere, no evidence that he'd ever existed at all, and poured herself a glass of wine from a crystal decanter that sat on a bar cart that probably cost more than my truck. She didn't offer me one, didn't ask if I wanted water after my long journey, didn't acknowledge that I'd just traveled halfway around the world to come home to this. "Your father left everything to me in his will, Sarah," she said, taking a sip of wine, her lipstick leaving a perfect red mark on the glass. "I was his wife. That's how marriage works. And yes, I sold the property because I couldn't maintain 200 acres on my own, and frankly, keeping a dying farm running on sentiment wasn't a good financial investment. This land was worth millions, millions, just sitting here growing tobacco and housing horses. I used the money to build something beautiful, something with actual value, something modern and functional instead of a crumbling old house that needed a new roof and had plumbing from the 1950s. I felt something crack inside me like ice breaking on a frozen pond. Investment? My father's legacy was an investment to you? He loved that land. He worked that land every single day of his life since he was 15 years old. My voice broke, and I hated myself for it. Hated that she could see me breaking down. Hated that I was giving her the satisfaction of seeing how much this hurt. He promised me. Before I deployed, he looked me in the eye and promised me the farm would be mine. He said he'd made sure of it. Well, he lied, Vanessa said simply, setting down her wine glass with a crystalline clink that echoed in the cavernous room. Or he changed his mind. Or he was in cognitive decline and didn't remember making you that promise. Either way, the will was very clear. Everything went to me. The land, the house, the bank accounts, the investment portfolio, all of it. Every single asset in his name became mine the moment he died. I had every legal right to do what I did. If you have a problem with that, take it up with his lawyer. Oh wait, you can't, because it's been over a year, and the estate is closed, settled, distributed, done. She smiled then, and it was the cruelest thing I'd ever seen. Crueler than anything I'd witnessed in 18 months of deployment. Crueler than the combat I'd seen. Crueler than the violence and chaos of war. Because this was personal. This was designed specifically to hurt me. You were at sea when he died, Sarah. You weren't there? I was. I was the one holding his hand in the hospital. I was the one making the funeral arrangements. I was the one dealing with lawyers and paperwork and creditors while you were halfway around the world playing sailor. He chose me. He married me. And in the end, when it mattered, he left everything to me. Not you. The room felt too small suddenly. The air too thick. I could feel my heartbeat in my temples, could taste copper in my mouth like I'd bitten my tongue. He wouldn't do that. You're lying. He wouldn't cut me out of his will. He wouldn't he? Vanessa picked up her wine glass again, swirling the red liquid like she didn't have a care in the world. You left, Sarah. You joined the Navy and left him here alone. You chose your career over him. Why wouldn't he choose someone who actually stayed? Someone who was here when he needed her? I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab that crystal decanter and throw it through the floor-to-ceiling windows. I wanted to tear down every piece of expensive art on these walls and burn this house to the ground. But I was a sailor. I was trained to maintain composure under pressure. So I stood there, hands clenched into fists at my sides, and forced myself to speak calmly. I want to see the will. I want to see the legal documents that gave you the right to destroy my family's legacy. They're public record, Vanessa said with a shrug. Go to the courthouse. Look them up yourself. But I'll save you the trip. It's all legal, all proper, all filed correctly. Now I think it's time for you to leave. You're tracking dirt on my floors, and like I said, my husband has business calls to make. I didn't sleep that night. I checked into a motel off Route 29, a depressing little place called the Countryside Inn that smelled like cigarettes and desperation and had water stains on the ceiling that looked like maps of countries that didn't exist. The mattress was lumpy, the air conditioning rattled like it was trying to escape its metal cage, and through the paper-thin walls I could hear a couple fighting about money, but I barely noticed any of it. I sat on the squeaky bed with my laptop balanced on my knees, searching through everything I could find about Dad's estate, my eyes burning from screen glare and lack of sleep. Vanessa was right about one thing. The will was public record. I found it online at 3:47 a.m. I downloaded the PDF with trembling hands and read through the document that had destroyed my life. The words swam on the screen, but the meaning was crystal clear. I, Robert James Crawford, being of sound mind and body, do hereby leave all my worldly possessions, including but not limited to my property located at 4852 Mill Creek Road, Albemarle County, Virginia, To my beloved wife, Vanessa Marie Crawford, to do with as she sees fit. I further stipulate that this bequest is made free and clear, with no restrictions, conditions, or obligations. That was it. 3 sentences that erased 4 generations of my family's history. 3 sentences that gave everything, every acre, every building, every asset, to a woman who'd married my father 3 years ago at a Las Vegas wedding chapel I hadn't even been invited to. The will was dated February 14th, 2023. Valentine's Day, how romantic. 6 months before I deployed, 4 months before Dad died. It was witnessed by 2 people I'd never heard of, notarized by a notary public in Charlottesville, and filed with the court on June 5th, 2023, just 2 days after Dad's death. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely scroll through the PDF. I read it 3 times, then 4, then 5, looking for something, anything, that didn't make sense, that didn't fit, that would give me a legal foothold to challenge this document. But there was nothing. It was clean, proper, legal in every way that mattered, but something felt wrong. Deep in my gut, in that place where instinct lives, something was screaming that this wasn't right. Dad wasn't the type to cut me out. He wasn't the type to break a promise, especially not a promise as important as the one he'd made before I deployed. I remembered that conversation like it was burned into my memory. Every word, every gesture, every detail. We'd been standing in the barn, and I was loading my sea bag into my truck for the drive to Norfolk, where I'd catch my flight to Bahrain. It was late April, and the dogwoods were blooming, filling the air with that sweet scent that means spring in Virginia. Dad looked older than I'd ever seen him. His hair was completely gray. His face was lined with wrinkles I didn't remember from my last leave, and he moved slower, like his joints hurt. But his eyes were clear and blue and filled with love when he looked at me. "Sarah Bear," he'd said, using the nickname he'd called me since I was 4 years old and had insisted on being called Bear because I thought it sounded tough. "I know you're scared. I know this deployment feels like the end of the world. I know you're worried about leaving me here alone, but I need you to remember something." He'd put his rough, calloused hands on my shoulders, hands that smelled like earth and honest work, and his eyes, those clear blue eyes I'd inherited, were wet with tears. "This land is yours. Your great-great-grandfather, William Crawford, built the first cabin here with his bare hands in 1847. Your mother planted every rose bush in that garden before the cancer took her. Your grandfather raised tobacco in those fields and sent your father to college with the money. This isn't just dirt and trees, baby girl. This is your blood. This is your history. This is your future. And no matter what happens to me, no matter what anyone tells you, no matter what circumstances arise, this land will always be yours. I've made sure of it. I've made sure of it." Those words echoed in my head like a prayer, like a ghost haunting me. What did that mean? Had he made sure of it in the will that gave everything to Vanessa? That didn't make sense. That was the opposite of making sure I got the land. Unless there was something else. Something she didn't know about. Something he'd hidden from her. The next morning, exhausted and running on coffee and desperation, I drove to the law office of Mitchell and Associates, the firm that had handled my family's legal matters for 30 years. George Mitchell had been Dad's lawyer since before I was born. He'd handled my parents' wills when I was a baby, had managed the estate when my mother died, had helped Dad navigate the legal complexities of running a farm as a single parent. If anyone knew the truth about Dad's intentions, it would be George. But when I walked into the office, a converted Victorian house in downtown Charlottesville with purple wisteria growing up the side, and a sign that read, "Mitchell and Associates, serving families since 1989. The receptionist gave me a sympathetic look that made my stomach drop before she even spoke. "I'm so sorry, honey," she said softly, genuine sadness in her voice. She was maybe 60 years old, with gray hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Mr. Mitchell passed away 8 months ago. Massive stroke. He was at his desk 1 minute, gone the next. It was very sudden. But his son, David, took over the practice. Let me see if he's available to speak with you. David Mitchell was nothing like his father. Where George had been warm and grandfatherly, with laugh lines around his eyes and a habit of offering hard candy from a jar on his desk, David was cold and corporate. Mid-30s, expensive charcoal suit that looked like it had been tailored in New York, slicked back hair that gleamed with product, and the kind of handshake that felt like a business transaction instead of a human greeting. His office was different too. Gone were the family photos and hunting trophies and comfortable leather chairs. Now it was all modern furniture, glass desk, abstract art on the walls, and a view of downtown Charlottesville that probably cost him an extra $1,000 a month in rent. He listened to my story with increasing impatience, his fingers drumming on his mahogany desk in a rhythm that felt calculated to annoy, checking his Rolex twice before I even finished explaining why I was there. "Ms. Crawford," he said, cutting me off mid-sentence when I started to explain about Dad's promise. "I understand you're upset. Losing a parent is difficult. I lost my father recently too, so I do empathize with what you're going through. But the will was executed properly, witnessed by 2 parties as required by Virginia law, notarized, and filed with the court. Your stepmother was the sole beneficiary. There's nothing unusual about that, and there's certainly nothing illegal about it." He started gathering papers on his desk, a clear dismissal, his movements efficient and practiced. "If you want to contest the will, you're about a year too late. The estate has been settled and distributed. The property has been sold. The assets have been transferred. There's nothing to contest anymore." "But my father told me," I started, leaning forward in my chair, desperation creeping into my voice in a way that made me ashamed. He actually laughed. It was a short, sharp sound that felt like a slap, condescending and dismissive in equal measure. "What your father told you and what he put in his legal documents are 2 different things, Ms. Crawford. People say a lot of things to their children that they don't put in writing. Parents make promises they don't intend to keep. Maybe he intended to leave you something. Maybe he changed his mind after you joined the military and left him here alone. Maybe he was in cognitive decline toward the end and didn't remember making the promise. But what matters, the only thing that matters in a court of law, is the will. And the will is very clear." I stood up, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor with a sound that made David wince. "Your father wouldn't have let this happen. George Mitchell knew my family for 30 years. He knew what that land meant to us. He knew the history, the legacy, the importance of keeping it in the family. He would have—" "My father is dead, Ms. Crawford," David said coldly, standing to face me across the desk, his hands flat on the glass surface. "And before he died, he was suffering from dementia. Early onset. His records from his last 2 years of practice are unreliable, to say the least. I've been going through his files, cleaning up his messes, fixing his mistakes, settling the malpractice claims. If he told you something different from what's in the official will, then he was confused. I'm sorry, but that's the truth. He wasn't competent in his final years." The words felt like poison. George Mitchell had been sharp as a tack the last time I'd seen him. At my mother's funeral when I was 12 years old, he'd quoted case law from memory and told me stories about his own daughter joining the Air Force. The idea that he'd been incompetent, that he'd let my father's will be mishandled, felt wrong in every possible way. Can I at least see my father's file? All of it? There has to be something in there, notes, emails, drafts of other documents, something that shows what he really wanted. "Attorney-client privilege died with the client," David interrupted, his voice taking on a lecturing tone that made me want to reach across the desk and grab him by his silk tie. "But even if it didn't, I wouldn't be able to show you anything without your stepmother's permission, since she was the executor of the estate. And I can tell you right now, she's not going to give that permission. She wants to move on with her life. She wants to put this behind her. He walked to the door and opened it, a clear signal that our meeting was over. As I walked past him, my shoulders tight with barely controlled rage, he added, almost as an afterthought, "For what it's worth, I am sorry for your loss. Your father was a good man from what I understand, but holding on to false hope won't change the reality of the situation. The sooner you accept that, the sooner you can move forward with your own life." I drove back to the motel in a daze, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white, my mind racing through everything that had just happened. Something was wrong. Everything about this was wrong. Dad wouldn't have cut me out. George Mitchell wouldn't have let it happen. And David Mitchell? There was something off about him, something rehearsed and defensive in the way he'd shut me down, like he'd been expecting me, like he'd prepared for this exact conversation. That night, sitting in my depressing motel room with the sounds of the highway filtering through the thin walls, I did what any good sailor does when the official channels fail them. I went around the system. I called an old friend from high school, Marcus Chen, who'd become a private investigator after washing out of the police academy for punching a suspect who'd beaten his girlfriend. Marcus had always been good at finding information that people wanted to keep hidden. "Mark," I said when he picked up on the third ring, his voice groggy with sleep because it was past midnight, and I'd forgotten about normal people's schedules. "I need your help, and I need you to not ask too many questions about why I need it or what I'm going to do with the information you find." "Sarah Crawford," he said, suddenly sounding much more awake. "I heard you were back in town. I heard about your dad, too." "I'm sorry. He was a good man." There was a pause, and I could hear him moving around, probably getting out of bed. "What do you need?" Marcus Chen met me at a diner off I-64 3 days later, sliding into the booth across from me with a manila folder that looked too thin to contain anything useful. He was heavier than I remembered from high school, his hairline receding, a scar on his left cheek that hadn't been there before. But his eyes still had that sharp, observant quality that had made him the best poker player in our graduating class. The guy who could read people like books and knew when they were lying. "You look like hell," he said without preamble, waving away the waitress who tried to offer him coffee. "When's the last time you slept?" "I don't know, Tuesday maybe." I wrapped my hands around my own coffee cup, trying to absorb its warmth. "Tell me you found something, Mark. Tell me I'm not crazy." He pulled out the manila folder and set it on the sticky table between us, his expression grim. "You're not crazy. But you're not going to like what I found either. This whole situation is dirty, Sarah. Really dirty." I opened the folder with trembling hands. Inside were printouts of property records, financial transactions, email correspondence that looked like it had been screenshot from someone's computer, and what appeared to be medical records. "Talk me through it," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, aware that anyone in the diner could be listening, could be connected to Vanessa somehow. "Okay, so first, the timeline. Your dad died on June 3rd, 2023 at approximately 2:47 a.m. at the University of Virginia Medical Center. Cause of death was listed as acute myocardial infarction, a heart attack. The will was filed for probate on June 5th, just 2 days later." "That's fast." "Suspiciously fast. Most people don't file for probate until after the funeral, until after they've had time to grieve, until after family members have had a chance to gather and discuss the estate. Vanessa had the will in court before your dad was even buried." Marcus pulled out a highlighted property record. "Second, the property sale. She listed the farm for sale on June 30th, exactly 27 days after your father died. The listing price was $4, $2 million. The sale closed on August 15th for $5 million. She got over asking, which is unusual for a property that size. And here's where it gets interesting. Construction permits for the new house were filed on July 10th. That's 10 days before the property sale even closed. You don't file construction permits 10 days after listing a property for sale. You file them when you've already had extensive meetings with architects and contractors, when you've got blueprints drawn up, when you've been planning for months. My blood ran cold. You think she knew he was going to die? You think she planned this before he even— I think she was prepared for it, Marcus said carefully, pulling out another document. Look at this. These are blueprints for the new house dated April 2023, 2 months before your father died. She was planning to tear down his house and build that mansion while he was still alive. Either she was planning to divorce him and take the property and the settlement, or she was planning for him to die. I felt sick. Actually, physically sick. Like I might vomit right there in the diner booth. What else? This is where it gets really interesting. Marcus pulled out what looked like a corporate filing document. I did some digging into David Mitchell. George Mitchell's son? The one who took over the practice. He didn't just take over his father's law firm. 6 months ago, he married a woman named Claire Hartwell. Want to guess who Claire Hartwell is? Tell me. Vanessa's younger sister. They got married in a small ceremony in Napa Valley on January 14th, 2024, which means David Mitchell, the lawyer handling your father's estate, is now family with the woman who inherited everything. He's not just Vanessa's lawyer, he's her brother-in-law. He has a vested interest in making sure she keeps every penny of that estate. The diner suddenly felt too small, too hot. The smell of bacon grease and coffee was making my stomach turn. So he lied to me. When I asked to see my father's file, when I asked about other wills or documents, he lied because he's protecting his sister-in-law. It's not even technically illegal, Marcus said grimly. He can represent family members. It's ethically questionable, but not illegal. But here's the thing that made me really suspicious. George Mitchell died on October 12th, 2023. The official cause of death was an ischemic stroke, but I talked to his secretary, the woman who worked for him for 20 years, and she said something interesting. She said George had been acting strange in the weeks before he died. Paranoid, worried. He'd started locking his file cabinets, which he'd never done before. He'd been having meetings with someone from out of town, meetings he didn't tell her about, meetings that weren't on his official calendar. Who was he meeting with? She didn't know, but she remembers the dates. Late May 2023, about 2 weeks before your father died. 3 separate meetings, each about 2 hours long, with someone George was being very secretive about. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. My father. He was meeting with my father. That's what I think too, Marcus said. I think your father went to George Mitchell and did something. Changed his will, added a codicil, created a trust, something. And I think whatever he did, it contradicted the will that Vanessa filed. I think there's a second document out there somewhere, Sarah. A document that leaves the farm to you, just like your father promised. I pulled out the final document in the folder, a blurry photocopy of what looked like a receipt from another law firm. What's this? This is your smoking gun, 2 weeks before your father died. On May 20th, 2023, he visited a different law firm, Morrison & Associates, in Lynchburg, about 45 minutes from here. The receptionist I talked to wouldn't tell me anything specific, attorney-client privilege and all that, but she confirmed he had an appointment. A long appointment. You don't drive 45 minutes to a new lawyer's office for a casual consultation, Sarah. You do it when you're trying to keep something secret from someone. You do it when you don't trust your current lawyer anymore. He made a second will, I whispered, the pieces finally clicking into place. He made a second will, and Vanessa doesn't know it exists. Or she knows it exists and she hid it. Either way, there's a legal document out there that proves the farm should be mine. That's what I think, Marcus said. The question is, where is it? Why wasn't it filed when your father died? And how do we prove it exists? Morrison & Associates was located in a converted warehouse in downtown Lynchburg, in the part of the city that was being gentrified with artisanal coffee shops and yoga studios. The law office itself was on the third floor, accessible only by a creaky elevator that made alarming sounds as it climbed. It was the kind of place that handled workers' comp cases and small business contracts, not multi-million-dollar estates for wealthy farmers, which made it perfect for someone trying to keep a secret. The attorney who agreed to meet with me was a woman in her 60s named Patricia Morrison, the founding partner of the firm. She had steel gray hair cut in a no-nonsense bob, sharp brown eyes behind reading glasses that hung on a chain around her neck, and the kind of handshake that suggested she'd been breaking through glass ceilings since before I was born. "Miss Crawford," she said as I sat down in her office, which was cluttered with case files and law books and photographs of what I assumed were her grandchildren. "I'm limited in what I can tell you due to attorney-client privilege, but I will say this. Your father did come to see me in May of 2023, and I was very sorry to hear of his passing. He spoke about you with great pride." I leaned forward in my chair, my hands gripping the armrests. "Miss Morrison, I'll be direct with you. I think my father came to you to draft a second will, one that left his farm to me instead of to his wife. I think something happened to that will. Either it was never filed, or it was suppressed, or it's hidden somewhere. And I think my father's wife killed him to make sure she got the inheritance before he could change his legal documents." Patricia Morrison was quiet for a long moment, studying me with those sharp brown eyes, evaluating whether I was rational or desperate or dangerous. Finally, she said carefully, "What I can tell you, without violating privilege, is that your father expressed serious concerns about his current estate planning when he came to see me. He felt that his existing will, the one drafted by George Mitchell, didn't reflect his true wishes. He was particularly concerned about ensuring certain assets went to certain people regardless of what happened to him. He wanted ironclad protections." "Did you draft a new will for him?" "I can't confirm or deny that I drafted any specific documents," Patricia said, choosing her words carefully. "But I can tell you that if a person comes to me requesting a new will, I always recommend they take certain precautions. I recommend they keep the original document in a secure location, not with me, not with any attorney who might be compromised or influenced, but somewhere personal, somewhere only they know about. And I always recommend they tell at least one trusted person where to find it, in case something happens before they can file it themselves." My breath caught in my throat. Who would my father have trusted with that information? Patricia smiled sadly, and for the first time I saw real emotion in her eyes. "That's not a question I can answer for you, Miss Crawford, but I will say this. Your father talked about you constantly during our meetings. He showed me pictures on his phone. Pictures of you in your Navy uniform at boot camp graduation. Pictures of you as a little girl riding horses on the farm. Pictures of you and your mother in the garden. He said you were the only person in the world he could trust completely. The only person who understood what that land meant. The only person who would preserve the legacy instead of destroying it for profit." She stood up, signaling that our meeting was over, but her expression was kind. "I can't tell you what to look for, Miss Crawford, but if I were you, I'd think about where your father would have hidden something that mattered to him. Somewhere on that land. Somewhere that had meaning to both of you. Somewhere that Vanessa would never think to look." I left Patricia Morrison's office and drove aimlessly for an hour, my mind racing through memories, trying to think like my father, trying to figure out where he would have hidden a document that important. The farmhouse was gone, demolished to make way for Vanessa's mansion. The barn was gone, torn down because it didn't fit the aesthetic of the new property. The equipment sheds were gone. Even the old silo where Dad used to store grain was gone, replaced with some decorative water feature that probably cost a fortune. But Vanessa couldn't have demolished the entire 200 acres. That would have been impossible, and even in her greed, she wouldn't have seen the point. Somewhere in those woods, somewhere in the undeveloped parts of the property, was something from my childhood. Something that mattered. And then I remembered the hunting cabin. My great-grandfather had built it in the 1920s, a tiny structure deep in the woods on the far northeastern corner of the property. Dad used to take me there on camping trips when I was a kid. We'd hike through the woods with our sleeping bags and a cooler full of hot dogs, and we'd spend the weekend pretending we were pioneers, living off the land. He'd tell me stories about our family, about the generations who'd worked this soil, about the importance of preserving history. I drove back to what used to be the farm, parking my rental car on the side of the road about a mile from Vanessa's mansion, and walked into the woods. It took me over an hour to find it. The underbrush had grown thick in the years since I'd last been there, and I got turned around twice before I spotted the familiar landmark of 3 oak trees growing in a perfect triangle. The cabin was there, exactly where I remembered it. Half collapsed, covered in vines, looking like something out of a horror movie. The roof had partially caved in, the windows were broken, and the door hung off its hinges at a crooked angle, but it was still standing. And when I pulled aside the rotted boards covering the entrance and stepped inside, my flashlight beam caught something that made my heart stop. A metal lockbox, exactly like the one Dad used to keep important documents in, sitting on what remained of the old table. My hands were shaking so badly I almost couldn't get it open. It wasn't locked. The key was taped to the bottom, just like Dad used to do with everything important. But my fingers felt numb, disconnected from my body. Inside were documents, letters, photographs of my mother. And at the very bottom, a sealed envelope with my name written in Dad's handwriting. I sank to the floor of the cabin, dust and debris covering my jeans, and opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a letter dated May 15th, 2023, less than 3 weeks before he died. "My dearest Sarah Bear," it began, and I started crying before I even finished the first sentence, tears streaming down my face, my chest heaving with sobs I'd been holding back for 18 months. "If you're reading this, then I'm gone, and I'm so sorry I can't be there to see the woman you've become. I'm sorry I can't walk you down the aisle someday, can't meet my grandchildren, can't grow old watching you build your life on this land that we both love so much. I'm sorry for so many things, but most of all, I'm sorry that you're having to fight this battle that I should have prevented. I need you to know that everything I did to protect you and to protect our family's legacy. By the time you read this, you'll probably know that Vanessa tried to take everything from you. I know this because I've seen who she really is. Too late, I'm afraid, but I've seen it. She married me for money, for status, for this farm. She never loved me. She never even pretended to love me, not behind closed doors. And I was a fool for not seeing it sooner. 3 months ago, I was diagnosed with congestive heart failure. The doctors gave me 6 months to live, maybe a year if I was lucky. I didn't tell you because you were about to deploy, and I didn't want you carrying that weight while you were in danger. But I knew I needed to act fast. I knew Vanessa would try to take everything the moment I was gone. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold the letter. I had to set it down on the dusty floor and read it there, my tears leaving wet spots on the paper. So I did something I never thought I'd have to do. I lied to her. I let her think the will George Mitchell drew up 3 years ago was the only will, the real will. I let her think she'd won. But the truth is in the lockbox with this letter, Sarah. The truth is that I wrote a second will with a lawyer she's never heard of, a will that leaves the farm, all 200 acres, every single inch of it, to you and you alone. The house was mortgaged anyway, and I knew she'd sell it, so I let her have that in the official will. But the land itself, the thing that really matters, the thing that's been in our family for 4 generations, that's yours. I've made sure of it. I've made it bulletproof. I've left instructions with Patricia Morrison to file this will as soon as you contact her and provide the code word, dogwood. That was your mother's favorite tree. and the one we planted together on her last Mother's Day. When you say that word to Patricia, she'll know you found this letter, and she'll file the real will with the court. There will be a legal fight. Vanessa won't go down without one. But this is the real will, Sarah. This is the legal will. This is the one that represents my true wishes. And I've made sure it's so thoroughly documented, so properly executed, that no court in Virginia will be able to overturn it. I folded forward over the letter, sobbing into the dusty floor of the cabin. All the grief I'd been holding back since that phone call in the middle of the Persian Gulf pouring out of me in waves that felt like they might drown me. Dad had protected me, even knowing he was dying, even sick and weakened, even married to a woman who was probably poisoning him. He'd fought for me. He'd made sure I wouldn't lose everything. But there was more to the letter. I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand, leaving dirt streaks on my face, and kept reading. There's something else you need to know, something that's going to be hard to hear. I don't think my heart failure is entirely natural, Sarah. I think Vanessa is killing me. I can't prove it, but I know it in my bones. My symptoms don't match what the doctors are telling me. I'm getting sicker faster than I should be, and I've noticed that my medication tastes different sometimes, looks different, feels different. I've been documenting everything. Every pill I take, every symptom I experience, every conversation I have with Vanessa about my health and my will and the farm. I've been recording conversations without her knowledge. I've been keeping detailed medical logs. All of it is in this lockbox. All of it is evidence if you need it. If I'm right, if she is poisoning me, then please make sure she pays for what she's done. Not just for me, but for every other person she might do this to in the future. She's dangerous, Sarah. More dangerous than I ever imagined when I married her. Be careful. Watch your back. Don't trust anyone connected to her. Not her family, not her friends, not her lawyers, especially not David Mitchell. I think George Mitchell knew about the second will, and I think that's why he died so suddenly. I can't prove it, but the timing is too suspicious. George was going to help me file the real will and invalidate the fake one. And 2 weeks later, he had a stroke. A healthy man with no history of heart problems, and he just drops dead? I don't believe in coincidences like that. But you're stronger than she is, Sarah Bear. You're a sailor. You've survived things she can't even imagine. You're my daughter, and you're your mother's daughter. And you come from 4 generations of people who've survived wars and depressions and droughts and every other hardship this land could throw at them. Take this will, take your land back, and don't let anyone, not Vanessa, not her lawyers, not anyone, tell you that you don't deserve what's yours. Build your life here. Fill this land with love and laughter and children and horses and everything we ever dreamed of. That's my final wish. That's my legacy. I love you more than you'll ever know, Sarah. Your mother would be so proud of the woman you've become, strong and brave and honorable. And I'm proud too, so proud. All my love, Dad. I called Patricia Morrison from the cabin, my voice still raw from crying, my hands still shaking from the adrenaline and grief and rage coursing through my body. I found it, I told her, not caring if anyone was listening, not caring about security or caution anymore. I found the lockbox. I found my father's letter. And I found the second will. The code word is dogwood. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then Patricia said quietly, urgently, "Bring everything to my office first thing tomorrow morning. Don't tell anyone you have it. Don't go back to your motel. Don't contact Vanessa. Don't post anything on social media. Just come straight here. And Sarah, be very, very careful. If your father's suspicions are correct, if Vanessa really did what he thought she was doing, then she's not going to let you take this land without a fight. But I didn't listen. I should have, but I didn't. Because there was something I needed to know first. something that had been nagging at me since Marcus showed me those documents about the suspicious timeline of the property sale and the construction permits. I drove to the county records office just before it closed at 5 p.m. and requested every document related to my father's death. The clerk, a tired-looking woman in her 50s with reading glasses on a chain and a name tag that said Brenda, gave me a stack of papers: the death certificate, the coroner's report, the hospital admission records, the ambulance report. And that's when I found it. The thing that changed everything. My father didn't die of a heart attack. Not exactly. Officially he did. That's what the death certificate said in plain black letters. Acute myocardial infarction due to congestive heart failure. Natural causes. Expected in a man with his condition. Nothing suspicious about it at all. But buried in the hospital records, in handwritten notes from the emergency room doctor who treated him in his final hours, was a toxicology report that had been ordered but never properly followed up on. It showed elevated levels of digoxin in his blood. The test result was highlighted in yellow with a note in the margin that read, "Significantly elevated, recommend cardiology consult." The digoxin level was 4, 2 ng/ml. Normal therapeutic range is 0, 5 to 2, 0 ng/ml. Anything over 2 is considered toxic. My father's digoxin level was more than double the toxic threshold. Digoxin is a heart medication. In normal doses, it helps regulate heart rhythm and strengthens the heart muscle in patients with heart failure. In high doses, it causes heart attacks. It causes the exact symptoms my father had experienced in his final weeks: nausea, confusion, visual disturbances, irregular heartbeat, and ultimately cardiac arrest. My father was prescribed digoxin for his heart condition. He took it every day, 0. 25 mg, 1 tablet in the morning with breakfast. His prescription bottle would have contained 30 pills per month. But someone had been giving him more than he was prescribed. Someone had been crushing extra pills into his food or drinks. Someone had been poisoning him slowly, methodically, over weeks or maybe months, gradually increasing his digoxin levels until his heart simply couldn't take it anymore. I sat in my rental car in the parking lot of the county records office, the hospital records spread across my steering wheel, and felt something cold and sharp settle in my chest. This wasn't just about money. This wasn't just about stealing my inheritance. This wasn't just about destroying my family's legacy. This was murder. Premeditated, calculated, cold-blooded murder. Vanessa had killed my father. And then my phone rang, the sudden sound making me jump so hard I dropped the papers. Unknown number. I answered it without thinking, my mind still reeling from what I'd discovered, my hand trembling as I held the phone to my ear. Sarah Crawford. The voice was male, professional, with a southern accent that suggested he was local. Yes? This is Detective James Harmon with the Albemarle County Sheriff's Office. I need you to come to the station right away. We have some questions about your father's estate and some irregularities that have come to our attention. My blood ran cold. The police. The police were involved. That meant someone else had figured it out. Someone else knew about the murder, about the fraud, about everything. Or it was a trap. Or Vanessa had somehow found out I knew the truth and had gotten to the police first, had spun some story that made me look like the criminal. What kind of irregularities? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, trying not to sound like someone who'd just discovered evidence of murder. I'd rather discuss this in person, Miss Crawford. How soon can you get here? I looked down at the toxicology report in my lap, at the evidence of my father's murder printed in clinical medical terminology. I can be there in 20 minutes. Good. And Miss Crawford, don't contact Vanessa Crawford or anyone associated with her before you come in. Don't call David Mitchell or any other lawyers. Don't talk to anyone about this. This is very important. Do you understand? I understand, I said. though I didn't, not really. He hung up before I could ask any more questions. I sat there in the gathering darkness, watching the sun set over the Blue Ridge Mountains in the distance, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple that my mother used to love. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what this meant, what the police knew, whether I was about to get justice or walk into some kind of trap. There was only one way to find out. The Albemarle County Sheriff's Office was a squat brick building on the edge of town, next to a Dairy Queen and a gas station, with a parking lot full of patrol cars and a flag flying at half-mast for some officer who died in the line of duty. The building was fluorescent lit and smelled like burnt coffee and old paperwork and that particular institutional cleaning product that all government buildings seem to use. Detective Harmon met me in the lobby himself, mid-40s, military haircut going gray at the temples, broad shoulders that suggested he'd been in the service before becoming a cop, and a handshake that was firm without being aggressive. He looked at my navy sweatshirt with the USS Winston Churchill logo and nodded with respect. "Thank you for coming in so quickly, Ms. Crawford. I appreciate your cooperation. Please follow me." He led me through a maze of cubicles and offices to an interview room, not an interrogation room. He was very careful to specify. Just a private place where we could talk without interruption. The room had a table, 4 chairs, a two-way mirror that I assumed was for observation, and nothing else. He offered me water and coffee. I accepted both, my throat dry from fear and my hands needing something to hold. Once we were seated, with the door closed and a digital recorder running on the table between us, he pulled out a file folder that looked disturbingly thick, at least 3 inches of documents. "3 weeks ago," he began, his voice calm and professional, "we received an anonymous tip through an encrypted email service. The tipster claimed that Robert Crawford had been murdered and that his wife, Vanessa Crawford, had poisoned him with digoxin while simultaneously manipulating his estate to steal an inheritance that rightfully belonged to his daughter." He looked up at me, his eyes sharp and evaluating. The tipster was very specific. They provided us with medical records showing elevated digoxin levels, financial documents showing suspicious transactions, copies of property records, and a copy of what they claimed was a second will that contradicted the one filed with the court. My heart was pounding so hard I thought he might be able to hear it. Who was the tipster? "We don't know. The information came through an encrypted email service based overseas, untraceable even with FBI resources. The email address was used once and then deactivated, but everything they sent us checked out. Every document was genuine. Every allegation was supported by evidence." He slid a document across the table, an official coroner's report with multiple stamps and signatures. "Based on that tip, we petitioned the court for an exhumation order. We exhumed your father's body 2 weeks ago and ran a comprehensive toxicology panel on tissue samples. The results came back 3 days ago." He paused, and I could see sympathy in his eyes, the kind of sympathy that comes before devastating news. "Your father was systematically poisoned with digoxin over a period of approximately 3 months. The levels in his bone and tissue samples were consistent with chronic overdosing. The pattern suggests someone was giving him approximately 2 to 3 times his prescribed dose on a daily basis, starting around March 2023 and continuing until his death in June." "That's not accidental, Miss Crawford. That's murder." I couldn't speak, even though I'd suspected it, even though I'd seen the hospital records myself, hearing it confirmed by a detective, seeing it in an official coroner's report, made it real in a way that hollowed me out and filled me with rage in equal measure. "We obtained a warrant to search Vanessa Crawford's residence yesterday morning at 6 a.m., Harmon continued, pulling out photographs. "These are pictures of what we found." The first photo showed a bathroom medicine cabinet. Inside was a prescription bottle with my father's name on it. Digoxin, 0. 25 milligram, prescribed by Dr. Michael Chen. The bottle should have been empty or nearly empty after more than a year. Instead, it was half full. The second photo showed Vanessa's bedroom, specifically a wall safe hidden behind a piece of abstract art. The third photo showed the contents of that safe: jewelry, cash, and a manila envelope labeled Robert's Documents. Inside that envelope, Harmon said, we found a copy of a second will, one dated May 20th, 2023, drafted by Patricia Morrison of Morrison and Associates in Lynchburg. That will leaves the farm property, all 200 acres, to you. It specifically excludes Vanessa from any claim on the land, though it allows her to keep the house and the liquid assets. She knew, I whispered, my voice breaking. She knew about the second will, and she hid it. She committed fraud. She knew, and she actively suppressed it. That's fraud, theft by deception, and conspiracy. We also found, in her laptop's browsing history, extensive research on digoxin toxicity, symptoms of digoxin overdose, and whether digoxin poisoning can be detected after death. She'd been researching this for months, Ms. Crawford. She knew exactly what she was doing. Harmon leaned back in his chair, and his expression hardened. We arrested Vanessa Crawford and David Mitchell at 3 p.m. yesterday. They're both being held without bail, charged as co-conspirators. Vanessa is charged with first-degree murder, fraud, theft, and conspiracy. David is charged as an accessory after the fact and with obstruction of justice. David knew about the second will? Oh, he knew. We found emails between him and Vanessa dating back to April 2023, before your father even died. They were discussing how to handle the Sarah situation, how to make sure the second will never saw the light of day. David's father, George Mitchell, had apparently told David about the second will shortly before George died. David and Vanessa conspired to suppress it. My mind was reeling. George Mitchell. Did they kill him too? Harmon's expression darkened, and I saw real anger flash in his eyes. We're investigating that now. George Mitchell's death in October 2023 was ruled natural causes, ischemic stroke. But given what we know now, we're taking another look at everything. His body was cremated at his son David's request, so we can't run toxicology tests. But we're interviewing his medical providers, his family members, and anyone who had contact with him in his final weeks. We're also looking into David's finances to see if there are any suspicious transactions. Who sent you the tip? I asked again, because that question was gnawing at me, because someone out there had known everything, had assembled all the evidence, and had handed the police a complete case. Who knew enough to send you all of that information? That's what I was hoping you could tell me, Harmon said, leaning forward. Because whoever it was, they had access to information that should have been private. They knew about the second will, which only a few people could have known. They knew about the digoxin levels, which would have required access to medical records. They knew about the financial fraud, which would have required access to bank accounts and property records. They basically handed us a complete murder case with documentation and evidence. That's not something an amateur does. That's someone with resources, connections, and a very strong motivation to see justice done. I thought about Patricia Morrison, about the way she'd been so careful with her words, so specific about what she could and couldn't tell me. But she wouldn't have had access to medical records unless Dad had given them to her. Unless he documented everything and left it all with her as insurance. I need to make a phone call, I said. Patricia Morrison answered on the first ring, like she'd been waiting for my call. Sarah, I've been expecting to hear from you. I assume you've spoken with Detective Harmon? It was you, I said, not even bothering with a preamble. You sent them everything. You're the anonymous tipster. There was a long pause. Then she said quietly, I couldn't tell you I was doing it. If I had, you might have tried to stop me, or you might have done something that would have compromised the investigation. Your father gave me very specific instructions before he died. He said if anything happened to him, if he died before he could file the second will himself, before he could divorce Vanessa, before he could protect himself, I was to wait. I was to wait until you came home from deployment. I was to wait until you'd had time to discover the truth on your own, to understand what had been taken from you. And then I was to make sure justice was served. He knew, I whispered, tears streaming down my face again, my chest tight with grief and rage. He knew she was killing him. He suspected, Patricia corrected gently. He couldn't prove it definitively, and he was too sick to fight by the end. The digoxin poisoning had weakened his heart to the point where he was having trouble even walking across a room. But he documented everything, Sarah. Every single pill he took, every symptom he experienced, every conversation with Vanessa about his health and his will, and what would happen to the farm after he died. He recorded conversations without her knowledge. Virginia is a one-party consent state, so that's legal. He kept detailed medical logs. He even collected his pill bottles and had them tested by a private lab to confirm they contained more digoxin than the prescription specified. Why didn't he just leave her? I asked, my voice breaking on the question. Why didn't he divorce her and kick her out and save himself? Because he was dying anyway, Patricia said, and I could hear the sadness in her voice. Even without the poisoning, the heart failure was terminal. The doctors had given him 6 months, maybe a year at most. And he knew that if he divorced her or tried to kick her out, she'd disappear. She'd take whatever money she could grab and vanish, and we'd never be able to prove what she'd done. So he made a different choice. He played along. He let her think she'd won. He let her think the first will was the only will, and he built a case against her that was absolutely airtight. I closed my eyes, fresh tears streaming down my face. My father had spent his last months on Earth not fighting for his life, but fighting for mine. Fighting to make sure I got justice. Fighting to make sure the land stayed in the family. Fighting to make sure Vanessa paid for what she'd done. There's one more thing, Patricia said, her voice taking on a different tone. Something your father wanted me to tell you only after everything else was resolved. It's about David Mitchell. I know he's Vanessa's brother-in-law. I know he married her sister. It's more than that, Sarah. We found emails between David and Vanessa dating back 2 years, before your father even got sick, before they even started the poisoning. They were planning this from the very beginning. David was supposed to marry into the family, position himself as the estate attorney, and then help Vanessa steal everything after your father died. They were going to split the proceeds. She'd get the land and the house, he'd get a percentage of the sale price as a legal fee, and they'd both walk away rich. The room spun. Claire Mitchell, David's wife, Vanessa's sister. She knew everything. She was complicit from the start. We found text messages between the 3 of them discussing the plan, joking about how easy it would be to fool a sick old man, laughing about how you were stuck overseas and wouldn't be able to do anything about it. Claire is being charged as an accessory. She helped them hide the second will, helped them forge documents, helped them cover their tracks. I hung up the phone and sat in my rental car in the parking lot of the sheriff's office for a long time, watching the sun set over the Blue Ridge Mountains, painting the sky in those colors my mother used to love. Tomorrow, I would start the process of reclaiming my farm. The court would invalidate Vanessa's fraudulent probate and honor the second will. The mansion built on my father's grave would be seized as proceeds of a crime and sold at auction. I'd use that money to restore what had been destroyed, to tear up the concrete, replant the gardens, rebuild the barn, bring back the horses. Vanessa, David, and Claire were all in jail, awaiting trial for murder, fraud, theft, and conspiracy. The prosecutor had told me they were looking at life sentences, that Virginia still had the death penalty for first-degree murder with special circumstances, that this case was so egregious it might warrant the maximum penalty. I should have felt relieved. I should have felt victorious. But all I felt was empty and tired and so angry that my father had died alone, poisoned by the woman he'd married, robbed of the chance to see me come home. But there was something else. Something I found that night when I went back to the hunting cabin to gather the rest of Dad's documents, to bring everything to Patricia Morrison so she could file the proper paperwork with the court. Hidden in the lockbox, beneath the will and the letter and the medical logs and the recordings, was a small envelope I'd missed the first time in my shock and grief. It was sealed with wax, old-fashioned and deliberate, and my name was written on the outside in Dad's careful handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a birth certificate. Not mine, someone else's. A baby girl born on September 3rd, 1989, at Henrico Doctors Hospital in Richmond, Virginia. Mother's name, Amanda Crawford. My mother's name, father's name, listed as unknown. But there was a note paper-clipped to the certificate, in Dad's handwriting, that told the real story. I stared at the document, my mind refusing to process what I was seeing. The date was wrong. I was born in 1995. This baby would be 6 years older than me, would be 34 years old now if she was still alive. I had a sister I'd never known existed. A sister born when my mother was only 17 years old, 6 years before my mother met my father, 8 years before they got married. A sister who had been given up for adoption because my mother was still in high school, because her parents were deeply religious and wouldn't allow her to keep the baby, because it was 1989 and unwed teenage mothers were still sent away in shame. Sarah, the note read in Dad's familiar handwriting. If you're reading this, then you've taken back what's yours, and I'm at peace. But you need to know you're not alone in this world. You have a sister. Her name is Emma Catherine Morrison. Yes, Morrison, as in Patricia Morrison's family. Amanda gave the baby to Patricia's younger sister, who couldn't have children of her own. It was a private adoption, very quiet, very secret. Amanda's parents never even knew she was pregnant. She spent those months living with an aunt in Richmond. And when she came home, the baby was gone. Your mother carried that secret her whole life. She wanted to tell you, wanted Emma to know her biological family, but she was terrified of her parents finding out, terrified of the shame and judgment. When she got sick, when we knew the cancer was going to take her, she made me promise to find Emma someday and tell her the truth. Tell her that she was loved, that giving her up wasn't a choice Amanda made lightly, that every birthday for 18 years your mother lit a candle and said a prayer for the daughter she'd never gotten to raise. I found Emma 5 years ago through an ancestry DNA test. She'd submitted her DNA hoping to find her biological family, and the system matched her to you, half-sisters, sharing a mother. I've been in contact with her. I've told her about you, about the farm, about our family history. She knows you exist. She knows she has a sister. And she's been waiting for the right time to meet you. I didn't tell you before because you were about to deploy, and I didn't want to overwhelm you with family drama when you needed to focus on staying alive. But now, if you're reading this, you're home. You're safe, and you deserve to know the truth. Emma doesn't know about the farm situation, doesn't know about Vanessa or the murder or any of this nightmare, but she knows about you. She has your email address, your phone number, everything I could give her without violating your privacy. The choice is yours, Sarah Bear. You can reach out to her, or you can let this go. But I wanted you to know. You're not alone. You have family. You have a sister who shares your blood, your history, your mother's eyes. Her contact information is in the lockbox. Whatever you decide, know that I love you. Know that your mother loved you. And know that Emma, your sister, who you've never met, already loves you too, because I've told her everything about the amazing woman you've become. All my love, Dad. I sat in the darkness of the cabin, holding the birth certificate in one hand and my phone in the other. The weight of everything, the murder, the betrayal, the justice, the inheritance, and now this impossible revelation pressing down on me like gravity itself had doubled. Somewhere out there in the world was a woman named Emma Catherine Morrison who shared my blood, my mother's DNA, my family's history. A woman who was probably wondering if I'd ever find this letter, if I'd ever reach out, if she'd ever get to meet the half-sister she'd been searching for her entire life. I looked at the phone number written at the bottom of Dad's note. Area code 540, somewhere in Virginia, probably not far from here. I could call right now. I could introduce myself. I could tell her everything. About Dad, about Vanessa, about the farm, about the legacy we now shared. Or I could wait. I could process everything that had happened. I could rebuild the farm first, reclaim what was stolen, honor Dad's memory by restoring what Vanessa had destroyed. But as I sat there, watching the moonlight filter through the broken roof of the cabin, I realized something. Dad hadn't wanted me to wait. He'd wanted me to know I wasn't alone. He'd wanted me to have family, to have support, to have someone who understood what it meant to be Amanda Crawford's daughter. I picked up my phone, my hands steady now, and started to dial Emma's number. The phone rang once, twice, and then a woman's voice answered. Hello? This is Emma. Hi, I said, my voice shaking with emotion. My name is Sarah Crawford. I think you're my sister. And on the other end of the line, I heard her start to cry.